Good afternoon. My name is Steph Francis and I'm a scientist at AWTTC, and I've been involved in the review of the AWMSG assessment process. And it's great that I can come here today to tell you about the updates we've made to those processes over the last 12 to 18 months. So this slide demonstrates the current or the processes for AWMSG assessment prior to 2025. So as you're all aware, NICE approved medicines or medicines that go through NICE Health Technology Assessment apply in Wales. So anything that's approved by NICE will be adopted for routine commissioning in Wales. However, alongside NICE, we also have two AWMSG routes of assessment. And that was traditionally the AWMSG Health Technology Assessment route and the One Wales route. So up until the end of 2024, the AWMSG Health Technology Assessment route was driven by the companies, pharmaceutical industry, submitting information about new medicines and significant license extensions. Those would be considered by AWTTC and it would be decided on whether to route them through the new medicines group for recommendation to AWMSG. So the One Wales process that ran alongside the AWMSG HTA process is for unlicensed and off-label medicines, and it was also used to consider licensed medicines interim to HTA. And those decisions would be made via the One Wales Medicines Assessment Group and approved by AWMSG. So over the last, say, 2 years, we've seen various changes at national and international level, which has really had a knock-on effect onto the AWMSG HTA process. And probably the biggest thing is the change to the remit and the level of HTA going through NICE. So knock-on effect there is that with an increase in NICE HTA, we're seeing a decrease in the number of medicines required to go through AWMSG HTA. We're also seeing a number of medicines that were not topic selected by NICE and would be adopted in England through approval through the NICE clinical guidelines or through NHS England commissioning. And that was resulting in a gap in advice for Wales, as there was no parallel process in Wales for routine commissioning of those medicines that don't fit the traditional health technology assessment process. Not only that, we've seen an increase in the number of complex medicines and those needing significant service considerations, and that has made horizon scanning more challenging and has led to various updates and revisions of how we horizon scan at AWTTC. So in terms of the medicines assessments, I want to talk to you today about what we've done to try and open out our licensed medicines assessment process so that we pick up medicines where there's a need, a clinical need, to provide advice on an all Wales basis. So despite adapting the horizon scanning processes, we've also reviewed our processes for the way in which we identify new medicines, and that's moving from an exclusion to an inclusion criteria so that we pick up medicines where there's a clinical need and value to both the NHS service, the clinicians and the patients. And we've also introduced a scrutiny panel so that AWTTC are not making decisions on routing internally, but it occurs more formally via the AWMSG scrutiny panel. We've also reviewed the remit of the AWMSG subcommittees, and I'll explain a bit more about that in the next slide. So apologies if this is a bit small on your screen, But this is a schematic available on our website that illustrates the new process for appraising licensed medicines and off-label medicines. So as I mentioned, we will identify medicines via pharmaceutical industry, through our internal horizon scanning processes, or through engagement with our clinical networks and clinical experts within the NHS. So once we've identified potential medicines for assessment, these will be taken to the AWMSG scrutiny panel, where they'll route the medicines for either consideration via the licensed One Wales Medicines Assessment Group or the One Wales Medicines Assessment Group for off-label medicines. And those decisions will go to AWMSG for endorsement and then to Welsh Government for approval. Now, focusing on that licensed route, the route that will go through the LOMAG to consider the clinical and cost effectiveness of the medicine, we looked at the criteria for assessing those licensed medicines, and we have split the licensed medicines into 3 domains. So we've still got the facility to assess a medicine via the full HTA assessment route, whether we aren't expecting that route to be very active, since most of those medicines suitable for HTA will be going through NICE. We have the facility to assess a medicine via interim health technology assessment, and that's really for medicines where they meet the criteria for HTA. However, there's a delay in NICE advice, or the company require more time to collect more data. And with those, we would expect some sort of commitment to full HTA in the future, and also a commercial arrangement to support that submission. So on the right-hand side is the criteria for the limited assessment process, and that's a new element of the licensed assessment route. And that really is to pick up the medicines where there's been a gap in advice and inequity of access. And that's across England and Wales, but also we found with some medicines there's instances where they don't meet full HTA, and then house boards are left to make their decisions locally, and that isn't always consistent. So the sorts of medicines we expect to go through the limited assessment process be those that have a small budget impact, those that are included in national guidance or accepted as standard of care, those that are commissioned elsewhere in the UK. So in summary, in terms of the changes from the old to the new process, we've moved from an exclusion criteria to an inclusion, and that is essentially medicines where there's a clinical need. We've moved from a process that was driven by the market authorization holder to one that's driven more by the service to meet that clinical need element of the criteria. We've moved from having an AWTTC new submission decision form process to having a more formal scrutiny panel to assist in decision making and routing of medicines through the assessment process. So previously we had the HTA and One Wales process. We've now separated this as the licensed and the off-label process. And to support those 2 routes, we've moved from having NMG to LOMAG. And NMG remit was narrower than LOMAG, and LOMAG now considers budgetary impact and societal issues, as well as clinical and cost effectiveness. And this means that AWMSG have more of an oversight and governance role. So the process, the new process has been in place since January, and then we plan to have a 12 to 18 months pilot where we'll report on how we have managed the new process over the last 12 to 18 months and make any required updates. So this slide I've just included just to illustrate where on the AWTTC website you can find more detail about the processes and a link to the relevant flow diagrams. And again, here is a link or an illustration of where you can access the clinical submission forms. So if you're aware of a medicine that you think would benefit from All Wales advice based on the criteria that you've seen in the slides today, and we'd encourage you to look at submitting a medicines information form via one that can be downloaded off the website. If you're interested in what's on our work programme, then you can find out via the work in progress page. And just to finish off, I just wanted to list a few medicines that have been through the new process since it began in April, and that is guanfacine, abiraterone and teriparatide. And slightly different scenarios in this case, but guanfacine had previous AWMHG negative advice. However, NICE had issued clinical guidance which included guanfacine, and there was also usage across a number of health boards in Wales, which was really causing issues in inequity of access. And due to its availability in England and also the fact that it's established, it was able to go through our limited assessment route. Abiraterone has NICE negative advice, however this predated the generics, and so there was a case for considering generic abiraterone via the limited assessment process. And teriparatide was considered for a restricted population that had been picked up by NHS England, but where there was no advice or equivalent advice in Wales. And that again was able to be considered via the limited assessment process. A couple of off-label medicines that have been to AWMHG last month, and that's panitumumab and trametinib. If you want any information, then feel free to email me at AWTTC or access the information via our website. Thank you.